A huge part of Trump's State of the Union address was talking about the border, immigration, and dangerous people flooding into America to commit violent crimes against citizens. But fact check, almost all of it was complete lies. And this violent rhetoric intended to demonize immigrants is at the heart of the rationale for what ICE is really up to, building detention centers secretly across America that resemble concentration camps. Trump isn't helping Americans win. He's taking us down a violent authoritarian route. My name is Kat Tenbarge. I'm an independent journalist partnering with Courier, and you can read more of my reporting at spitfirenews.com. Trump's approval rating is tanking, and a large part of that has to do with America's outrage over ICE's brutal occupation of American cities. Trump didn't talk about ICE during last night's State of the Union because he knows how unpopular those policies are. So instead, he talked about things like open borders, illegal immigration, and over again, he talked about supposed fraud and violent crime being committed by illegal immigrants. But none of it was true.
When I last spoke in this chamber 12 months ago, I had just inherited a nation in crisis with a stagnant economy, inflation at record levels, a wide open border, horrendous recruitment for military and police, rampant crime at home, and wars and chaos all over the world. But tonight, after just 1 year, I can say with dignity and pride that we have achieved a transformation like no one has ever seen before and a turnaround for the ages. It is indeed a turnaround for the ages. And we will never go back to where we were just a very short time ago. We're not going back. Today, our border is secure.
Trump's entire speech last night was based on lies. He misidentifies what's happened to the United States since he began his second term, claiming that the economy is better, that the country is more stable, and that borders that were previously opened are now closed. But the reality is, the economy is in a significantly worse place because of Trump's policies like tariffs. And when it comes to borders and ICE and immigration, all of these measures previously existed under Democrat presidents. The difference between what Trump is doing with ICE now is that he's allocated billions more dollars of funding for malicious purposes, shooting unarmed Americans in the street and killing them in broad daylight, as well as building detention centers that resemble the interiors of slave ships and concentration camps. But you won't hear about that during the State of the Union. You'll just hear Republicans chanting and cheering and shouting USA like they're at a frat party.
Working people who make our country great, who make our country run. Under Biden and his corrupt partners in Congress and beyond, it reached a breaking point with the Green New scam, open borders for everyone. They poured in by the millions and millions from prisons, from mental institutions. They were murderers, 11,888 murders. They came into our country. You allowed that to happen. And record-setting inflation that cost the typical family $34,000.
Throughout his speech, Trump kept circling back to the idea that violent criminals were allowed into the United States because of open border policies. But the reality is that Trump isn't very smart, and no one has ever sat him down and explained to him that people seeking asylum in the United States are not people who exited mental hospitals in other countries and came to America. Seeking asylum is a legal term where you're seeking protection in another country because it's too unsafe for you to remain in your previous country of residence. But Trump is an idiot. He doesn't get that, or he's too malicious to care, because all of this rhetoric is ultimately intended as a violent means to an end. Trump and his party don't just want to deport, quote, illegal immigrants, they want to imprison people, including babies, in detention centers for profit. That is the goal here. And so, this rhetoric, as idiotic and stupid as it is a means to get to that end result because Americans who believe Trump and listen to him say these things are gullible enough to believe him. And the other Republicans who are cheering him on are feckless and have no care for the lived realities of all of these people who are currently suffering because of Trump's immigration policies and will continue to suffer in the future, including, again, babies, toddlers, and children who are crammed into these detention centers, who are sick and dying because they don't have access to proper medical care, they don't have access to clean water. These are modern day concentration camps. And this is the type of rhetoric being used to excuse them and applaud them.
Started 4 months ago, I am officially announcing the war on fraud to be led by our great Vice President J.D. Vance. He'll get it done. Find enough of that fraud, we will actually have a balanced budget overnight. It'll go very quickly. That's the kind of money you're talking about. We'll balance our budget. The Somali pirates who ransacked Minnesota remind us that there are large parts of the world and lawlessness are the norm, not the exception. Importing these cultures through unrestricted immigration and open borders brings those problems right here to the USA. And it is the American people who pay the price in higher medical bills, car insurance rates, rent, taxes, and perhaps most importantly, crime. We will take care of this problem. We're going to take care of this problem. We are not playing games. Delilah.
So here you have an example of pure, unbridled racism. It could not be clearer. Trump is highlighting specific African people and claiming that they are somehow more prone to fraud and violence than other people in America. What he's not saying here is that he's saying that white people are better than Black people. But people in the audience can hear him loud and clear because this is a party that, above almost everything, represents racism and white supremacy. And the lie that the Somali community defrauded Minnesota comes from a clickbait YouTuber who created a piece of racist propaganda that has fueled the Republican Party and the catastrophic occupation of Minneapolis by ICE, which has resulted in the deaths, shootings in broad daylight of American citizens. But you won't hear anything about that because Trump is instead repeating this racist lie over and over again. The reality is, white people are responsible for the vast majority of fraud in America, including Trump, his administration, and their allies like Elon Musk, who have committed more fraud than any ethnic community could ever accomplish because they're given that power and privilege because of the white supremacist hierarchy that this type of rhetoric suspends. Trump himself has defrauded the American people by using his position in office to profit and to allow all of his elitist friends to profit at the same time. Blaming fraud on the Somali community is a racist deflection and distraction from who the real people defrauding the American government are. In addition to that, Trump's claim that he can balance the budget overnight is absolutely ridiculous, and it will never happen. It's laughable. But is anyone going to hold him accountable for that? Let's check back in a few years and see if Trump's fantastical claim that he can balance the budget overnight ever actually came to fruition. Because I could bet you the billions of dollars that Trump has made over the past few years that it won't. Janai Nelson, who is the president and director counsel of LDF, the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, posted this on Blue Sky. She said Trump's lies and deception are at such a clip it's nearly impossible to keep track. But the blatant, insightful racist and xenophobic rhetoric against the Somali community is too dangerous and disgusting to be ignored. No one should sit in that chamber giving audience to such hatred. And it's important to point out the fact that not everyone sat in that chamber silently while Trump spewed these racist lies. Here are a few examples of Democratic representatives of color who chose to make their opposition loud and clear. During Trump's speech, Representatives Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib refused to be quiet. They heckled him and called out his racist lies.
To end deadly. That is why I'm also asking you to end deadly sanctuary cities that protect the criminals and enact serious penalties for public officials who block the removal of criminal aliens. In many cases, drug lords, murderers all over our country, they're blocking the removal of these people out of our country, and you should be ashamed of yourself.
As Trump perpetuated the lie that immigrants are uniquely dangerous people in our country, Ilhan Omar pointed out the truth, which is that Trump's actions have led to the death of American citizens who were killed in her district of Minnesota by ICE officers. Those ICE officers are the real murderers in the streets of America right now, killing people indiscriminately with no accountability. Senior politics reporter for HuffPost, Arthur Delaney, was in the room that night, and he posted the following on Blue Sky. I'm in the House chamber for Trump's State of the Union, and Rashida Tlaib is doing a Democratic rebuttal in real time from the floor, saying stuff like lies, what's he talking about, while Trump rambles on. Not sure he can hear her, but I'm about the same distance as he is from her seat. Both of these women later left the State of the Union in protest. So at least there was someone there in the crowd willing to hold Trump to account and willing to call out what should be obvious at this point. He's a violent authoritarian ruler who spews lies from his position of power. And even despite the cheers from his fellow Republicans, not everybody is okay with that. There are still members of Congress who are going to stand up and do the right thing, no matter the cost. Another member of Congress who was willing to do what's right is Representative Al Green, who was ejected after displaying a sign that said, "Black people aren't apes." This is a reference to racist AI generated imagery that Trump recently shared on Truth Social depicting Barack and Michelle Obama as apes. Racism is part and parcel of this administration's appeal, and Donald Trump knows that, which is why he repeatedly referred back to racist rhetoric during his speech. It's one of the few things he has left, since he certainly can't point to any accomplishments thus far in office that have made American life any better or helped any Americans in any material ways. Instead, all he can do is refer back to that racist bias that is unfortunately so present in Americans today that it will compel them to vote for a man who hates them, despises everything about them, and will only make their lives worse. But he's normalizing and approving of racism in the highest echelons of power in this country. And that, for some racist Americans, is clearly enough. Doesn't matter if they lose out on everything, as long as they get to point and laugh at other people, make their lives worse, discriminate against them, call for violence against them, and ultimately imprison them and their children in horrific conditions. That is such a sad portrait of Americans who still support this man. I also think it's notable that the Congress people who took the strongest stance against Trump's racism and lies were all people of color themselves. Their white allies in Congress should have more to say on this topic. Really, enough can't be said about the pervasive racism at the heart of Trump's popularity and his position in American society today.
And yesterday, as you probably saw at the White House, I hosted a ceremony with Americans who lost their treasured loved ones to the scourge of illegal immigration. People came into our country, how we allowed this to happen with our open borders. These are the angel moms and families that for decades our government betrayed and our media totally ignored. It was terrible. Hard to believe, actually.
Trump punctuated his violent anti immigration rhetoric with stories of Americans who have been brutally killed. He made sure to leverage every violent and gory detail of their deaths so that he could blame it all on immigration. When the reality is, some of the killers he described weren't even immigrants. They were Americans. And you cannot link violent crime to immigration alone, because where is Trump's condemnation of all of the violence against women that happens here on American soil perpetrated by Americans? Perhaps those allegations would hit too close to home, since Trump is, after all, named thousands of times in the Epstein files, and his own Department of Justice has scrubbed examples of sexual violence allegations made against him. So Trump doesn't want to talk about that. He wants to isolate this idea of violent crime to blame it entirely on, quote, open borders, which, just as a reminder, the United States has not had, not during Trump's term, not during any of the preceding Democratic terms he's talking about. Open borders at this point in American history is not a reality. So the root of violent crime is not immigration. It's actually rhetoric like Trump's that inspires violence. And MS Now's Rachel Maddow had a great take on this, on the sort of violent torture pornography that Trump uses to illustrate his points. Maddow said, he talked about people being covered in blood, gushing blood, blood pouring out of things. He talked about people being on the edge of death. He went into graphic detail on a number of different people's injuries of a various kind. And in those moments, he slowed down, ad libbed a lot, and tried to give seemingly as much sort of gory detail as he could, talking about very bloody scenes. He also, I should mention, in talking in very stark detail about a terrible attack on a Ukrainian woman in North Carolina, ad libbed that the person who had attacked her had gotten into this country because of open borders, which was not at all true. That woman was not attacked by somebody who had come from outside this country. But that was the sort of, again, sort of violently pornographic riffing that the president did very slowly throughout the back half of his speech, which made it go on for the longest period any State of the Union address has ever gone on before. There were very few actual proposals that were announced. He announced a war on fraud to be led by JD Vance, which we've already talked about. He announced something about 401ks. I think the length of the speech, there will be two takeaways. My takeaways from this speech, and the one is that the length of it, as the president luxuriated in the descriptions of the goriest things that have ever been mentioned in any State of the Union speech. So, all of this is to say that Trump loves talking about violence, blood, and gore when it can be used to his advantage because of his baseless racist proposals. But the reality is, there is unchecked state violence happening right now in America against immigrants, against people who are kept and held in these detention centers, of which ICE is planning to secretly build significantly more capacity of. Just today, Border Report news is in that ICE is secretly buying warehouses for detention centers in unsuspecting communities. Because when local people find out that ICE is building concentration camps in their backyard, they tend to get pretty upset. And local communities have successfully been able to thwart these efforts through local zoning laws. Even in Republican majority districts, even some of Trump's own supporters don't want to see these concentration camps getting built near them. They don't want their children to have to be exposed to the suffering of people they've deemed lesser than based on the color of their skin, the language they speak, and their country of origin, or even the country of their ancestors' origin. According to this article from KXAN.com, ICE wants to spend $38.3 billion to increase detention beds to 92,600 nationwide. At least 20 communities have been slated to have large warehouses converted into detention facilities that hold upwards of 10,000 people each. Independent reporter Marissa Kabas posted a schematic, a floor plan for one of these planned ICE concentration camps in Georgia. And when you look at this, all of these little dots are supposed to represent a person who's going to be imprisoned in these facilities, including children, toddlers, babies, even infants will be held in these facilities. They already are, and they're getting sick. As people pointed out below, this is remarkably similar to what slave ships looked like, as well as Holocaust concentration camps. History is tragically repeating itself. So when Trump refers to cultures that are violent and have no place in modern American society, He should really be looking in the mirror because nothing could be more violent than imprisoning infants and letting them suffer and even die in modern day concentration camps. But that's exactly what the Trump administration is already doing and is planning to do significantly more of off the base of this baseless, racist rhetoric. He just lies and lies and lies, and he uses those lies to justify and excuse the violence that he and his administration are committing actively. This is one reason why Congresswoman Ayanna Presley didn't even go to the State of the Union. Writing on Blue Sky, I have no regard for a man who rips parents away from children, deports families, and imprisons our babies. That's why I'm boycotting today's State of the Union and instead shedding light on the stories of our children terrorized by ICE, because our children deserve a childhood free from fear. And here she has photos of the letters being written by the children in these deportation centers. These letters will someday be in textbooks about this brutal, violent regime. And what a horrifying thought that is for all of us alive today who have to bear witness to this devastation. This is the real tragedy against children that should have been showcased at the State of the Union. But the man responsible for this depravity is unfortunately the President of the United States right now. And Trump can use his State of the Union speech to distract and deflect from these violent atrocities that are committed under his name. But for Americans elsewhere, we refuse to be complicit in this. We will continue to call him out and protest these detention centers in our backyards. We do not stand for concentration camps. We do not believe the violent lies being spread about our immigrant neighbors. The most violent person in the room last night was Donald Trump himself. For more coverage like this, be sure to subscribe to Courier on YouTube.